welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, I'm speaking with the Director of Advocacy at the Cicero Institute, a nonpartisan public policy organization with deep experience in government, legislation, and the law, technology, and entrepreneurship. Bryan, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you doing this. I'm familiar with the Cicero Institute. I think that a lot of y'all's research is very interesting, and what y'all do is pretty cool. So why don't we start there, sort of explain who you are and what the Cicero Institute is?
Yeah, my name's Bryan Sunderland. I've been in public policy for about 25 years, but for the last 18 months, I've been at the Cicero Institute. Cicero is a nonpartisan, nonprofit public policy organization. We have deep talent when it comes to digging into public policy, figuring out what states can do better. And then we have a separate 501c4 arm that helps lawmakers and helps align policymakers get those things accomplished. Cicero was really founded on a couple of principles. The idea of we need to have transparent, accountable government. You can sort of boil that all down to we believe in government competence. And a lot of our public systems right now seem broken to a lot of people. We throw billions of dollars away trying to solve problems just to throw more money at them. And we think there's a better way. And that's largely what we do.
So, you mentioned accountability and transparency in government. That's something that I think both sides of the aisle from every level of government talks about a lot, at least when they're campaigning. And then I don't know, it seems like there's not a lot of headway made. I personally have done a lot of FOIAs or public information requests, and it's kind of difficult. What's Cicero's take on those issues?
Well, transparency is a great talking point for a lot of folks. But when it comes down to it, what is transparent to the public? Is the data and the facts of what you're trying to solve transparent to the public or not? What really is lacking oftentimes is accountability. Take, for instance, homelessness. We spend tens of billions of dollars every year, and we keep being told we just need to fund it more. In January, the Biden administration announced $3.14 billion more to not only slow homelessness, but they're going to reverse it. It kind of sounds like the same promise that the governor of California made 10 years ago. But what we were actually seeing, if you look at the data says that in 2023, we had a double-digit rise in street-level homelessness. We're not actually solving the problems. We're just throwing more money on broken public policy.
So in that case, what would accountability look like? You said the Biden administration is going to throw another $3+ billion at the problem. I assume that's on top of, the regular budget that they typically use.
Tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah. And so in that case, what would accountability look like?
Accountability looks like this. What's working in a functional system, take a startup business, or take any business, like just general management practice. If something's working, you put more resources behind it. If something's broken, you figure out how to change it. It seems the opposite is what we're doing in a lot of our public policy. We're told that, no, we just need more money to do the same thing over and over again. While we watch the problem get worse, we're told, oh, but it'll get better. And that's where the disconnect between accountability is, because we're not using real metrics. We're not holding people accountable. We don't have the right incentives in place in a lot of these public policies. Homelessness is a great example of this. If you give a bunch of money to NGOs who fund large salaries and they get that money year after year after year to do the exact same things, they have no incentive to change. But if you put a performance-based funding measure in place where it says, we want to know how the money's spent, we want to know how many people you're helping, we want to know that people are getting off the street and getting the help they need. Ultimately, that's what we want to do to try to address homelessness, is we want to actually try to end it, not watch it cycle in perpetuity.
So is there, we're a federation of states, right, in the United States, and we're based in Texas. I want to try to focus on Texas as much as I can here, but we can certainly talk about federal and other states as well, especially
Sure.
in this case where there are so there. I mean, homelessness seems to be a problem across the United States. Obviously, some places are experiencing it worse. LA, California at large, Seattle, those areas on the West Coast. But it's also here in Austin is a big issue. Um,
Hmm.
is there, I don't know, is there a prime example in your opinion or in the Cicero Institute opinion of where it's working, where homeless policy is working to do just that, to reverse it, or I don't know. Everyone says they want to eliminate it. I don't know if that's possible, but
Yeah.
making a dent in it.
Well, the good news in Texas is you have made good strides there. Street level camping and being able to camp wherever you want has largely ended in Austin. That doesn't mean that you don't have a homeless problem. You don't have need for more resources, certainly, but also there is good news because unlike California, Oregon, and some of these other states who have sort of gone all in with this housing first notion that we're just going to build enough housing, and if we build enough housing, people will get homes. That's not working. There are a lot of reasons why people are homeless, and a lot of times it's other underlying reasons. It's not just a lack of affordable housing. A lot of times it's drug abuse, it's substance use disorder, it is mental health issues, it is broken families and things of that nature that people need help with services, more of a service first approach. Um, Texas, Florida, Georgia, we've helped pass legislation in Utah that are really sort of getting at the underlying problems and trying to just acknowledge that we need to try to get people off the streets. We need to not make it so that taking over entire street blocks and people living in these sort of dangerous homeless encampments that are generally, full of drug abuse and other violence. We need to get people off the streets into safer locations, into shelters where they can access services, where they can find people that can help them turn around their lives and have a chance. If we just accept the fact that we let people sleep on the street and that is somehow compassionate, we're going to continue to see the problem get worse. But a number of states have taken sort of proactive measures to, say we are going to take a service first approach. Governor DeSantis just signed a piece of legislation earlier this year that says Florida's not going to become, California. Georgia Governor Kemp signed a law say we're going to enforce our laws. We're going to do a full audit of all this spending, figure out where the money's going so that we can make good decisions moving forward. And, trying to instill that accountability into the system.
So you brought up permanent supportive housing, which I know has been the federal government's main approach to solving homelessness for, I don't know, I want to say almost 2 decades. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been a bipartisan failure in a lot of ways. Um, President George W. Bush bought into the idea and they started looking into it. Um, President Obama made it the policy. He made it the policy of the land. I think President Trump was starting to look at that more detailed. He had some different ideas that never really changed, and the Biden administration's doubled down on it as well. So largely the idea is that, and it's somewhat intuitive. Homelessness is a problem. We need more housing. So let's figure out how we can kind of meet that need. But what it ignores is the underlying needs of a lot of the people that find themselves homelessness. It's not just the higher rent payment. In large measure, it's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's mental health issues and drug abuse issues and other substance issues.
Yeah. So is this something, I guess the Cicero Institute, they'll state that the U.S. homeless policy has been a failure for decades. Um, is this system, and there needs to be a system-wide approach, a change to the system-wide
Mm-hmm.
approach. Is that best done from the top down, like from the federal government, or should that be more of a state by state thing?
Well, the beautiful thing is that states can figure out ways to fix things. That's why we do a lot of our work in the states. For instance, in Georgia, they decided this year to separate some additional funding and put it aside for a state level homelessness approach that doesn't spend money on sort of the housing first notion that all you need to do is a house. We don't need to put any kind of treatment in there. We don't need any sort of accountability measures. This idea, the federal idea is you can't do all these things. You just give them a house. What Georgia's doing is creating an accountable housing model that says, in order to access this housing, you're going to have to, do job training. You're going to have to stay clean. You can't have, a lot of drug abuse going on in the property and things like that. There's an accountability factor that really sets in place the types of things that are going to help people succeed, help them become successful tenants and not fall back into that cycle of homelessness.
Yeah. And I'm glad we started off with homelessness, because from there we can go several different directions, because with homelessness,
Sure.
there's, as you mentioned, there's a lot of health issues involved, from mental health and, drug abuse, stuff like that, public safety, even I think in some ways regulatory reform when it comes to small businesses and, licensing and stuff like that.
Even
Um,
housing.
Even housing, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, all of these things are big talking points in Texas, big issues in Texas, especially with the
Mm-hmm.
primary elections. I guess those are generally wrapping up. I know that there's some runoff still happening, but
Right.
the Texas legislature is meeting again next year. So why don't we just shoot into to healthcare?
Sure.
Um, I guess there's opposing sides on the healthcare debate. One says that it should be, that it's a human right and it should be universally available, paid for through taxes. Another side says, more of a free market approach. It kind of seems like we're maybe somewhere in the middle right now.
I certainly would say that we're somewhere in the middle, but healthcare might be the most broken sort of anti-market principle system right now. A lot of people would argue that there's not necessarily a functional market in place, even where we have health insurance markets. And I say that because a lot of the decisions being made are simply negotiations between different moneyed interests in the healthcare system. It's between the insurance companies who play an important role in figuring out, building networks and creating access for people. The providers who wants to make sure that they can collect enough money to be able to function in what is largely a broken system. And then government bureaucrats and layering all of the laws and regulations and rules on top of things. And with, frankly, some of them wanting to kind of take over the system, as you noted anyway, you'll notice the people I didn't talk about were us, the citizens. Where do we stand in all of this? And that's where we really want to focus on what can we do to make our healthcare system a much more patient focused, patient centered type of system. What do we do to give you the information you need to know? Are you getting the best healthcare when you get referred to this doctor? Do you know how much it's going to cost? Do you know how much it's going to cost overall? Do you know how much it's going to cost you? Because the overall cost of the system is impacting all of us, whether that is, ERISA healthcare that's written by larger companies that are using federal laws, whether it's the small businesses in Texas who are, having to shop for very difficult decisions between, how much money I can put in someone's paycheck versus how much more I have to pay for their health care. And then, of course, there's the public system, Medicaid, which, is, you know, absolutely devastating state budgets. So all of these things factor in. And so there's a lot of what we want to tackle is how can you make it more patient centered? How can you give patients? We have a reform called Right to Save that gives people the ability to take the transparent information on pricing that President Trump put into place and President Biden has kept in place. How do you take that information and make it useful for the consumer? How do you create incentives so that if someone goes and shops outside of the network that's been created for them and, find a better price with significant savings, why don't we let the consumer have an incentive to share in those savings. Give that person the ability to go, like, I found the service I need at $500 cheaper. Why should I save my insurance company 250, $500? Why don't we share that savings? So we're looking at models like that. Um, One other area of healthcare that we've had some real success in addressing is the healthcare shortage of physicians, and really all healthcare providers. Over the next decade, America is going to be 200,000 people short in healthcare workers. At
Is there a
120,
percentage of that is that's like doctors and nurse practitioners?
124,000, according to the AMA, is doctors.
Oh boy.
And if you think about the just sort of the baby boomer dynamic that we're going with a lot of the retirements, over half the doctors practicing in America today are age 55 or older. So fast forward a decade, how many of those are going to be retired and not practicing anymore? So we've been looking at how do you break down rules at the state level to allow more people to come in and practice. I know a lot of states are dealing with scope of practice issues for how much a nurse practitioner can do versus a doctor. And a lot of people in rural areas, I mean, the nurse practitioner is all they have in terms of getting healthcare service. Over a third of the U.S., they don't have a third of citizens don't have a primary care physician. So we've been working with a reform called international physicians. And it's like, if you can find an internationally licensed doctor that has 5 years of practice experience and a hospital here in the United States that wants to invite them to come practice, give them a 2-year temporary license, let them be overseen with other doctors around them to make sure things are going well. And if they successfully practice for 2 years, they already have 5+ years of experience practicing elsewhere. Give them a license. Let's see if we can accelerate the influx of doctors into the system, because it's going to take a lot longer to build the pipeline of new physicians being trained in the United States. So those are some of the things we've had that reform passed in Florida, Tennessee, Virginia, Wisconsin, Idaho, and it's pending in I think 4 or 5 other states right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, to focus on Texas, is there, I every time, I don't know, it seems like every so often I'll see some sort of news story or someone on social media post something about how, Texas ranks so low in healthcare, maybe outcomes, that sort of thing. I'm not real sure. I don't know. Just taking it at face value, assuming that it's 100% true. Why is that?
I'm not sure exactly the specific stats that you're looking at, but you've got a lot of disparities in Texas. You have a massive state. I mean, Texas is huge. And it takes a ton of funding. It takes a ton of dollars, and you've got a lot of rural areas of the state that don't have the types of healthcare services that are available here in Austin or in um, uh, Dallas, Houston, some of the larger cities. So part of that is that disparity. Two areas that I would point to that can be really helpful in that is one that we need to really address the rural physician shortage and the healthcare provider shortage, because that actually impacts real people and their ability to access care. And that's one of the main reasons we're focused there. But also telehealth. We can continue to expand telehealth rules. During COVID, a lot of states just really relaxed the laws, realized that people weren't going to go drive to the local emergency room or the urgent care center. And a lot of doctors were saying, healthier people need to stay away for little colds and stuff. So a lot more telehealth happened. Post COVID, some of those rules have been broken down and some have gone back to the same pre-COVID restrictions. I think there are a few things. Texas is pretty good, but there are a few things you can do to continue to loosen the telehealth laws, allow some independent practice there to provide more access to more people. So those are some of the areas that we really need to address, and frankly, our public systems, Medicaid, we really need to make sure that we wrestle as much control as you can away from the federal government in trying to set the rules on how Texas can make the Medicaid program work better for Texans.
Yeah. You mentioned that there's, the half of the physicians in the United States are over age 55. Um,
Yeah.
and that necessarily implies that there's, fewer young people going into the profession. And, I don't know, when I grew up, being a doctor was sort of I don't know, one of the dream jobs that every kid said they wanted to be when they were a kid. And I look around here in Austin, we're building teaching hospitals, the Dell Medical School here in Austin. It seems like there's a lot
Mhm.
of, I don't know, investment in people becoming a physician. Why aren't people doing it?
Well, I think
Is
there
that
are a
known? I
number.
mean, it could be, that could be I mean, it's obviously a case by case basis, but is that a known answer?
It it is to some degree. There are physicians that I've talked to who are encouraging their son daughters to become dentists instead. Some of it's the medical liability. Some of it's the paperwork. A lot of physicians used to own their own offices. Most of them are employed by hospitals and larger healthcare facilities now. And some of it is just they don't have the autonomy they used to. But I think a lot of it is some of it is self-imposed government regulations and things. The AMA many years ago thought that we were going to have too many doctors in the US as a matter of public policy, sort of ramped down the number of internships and things that were being funded. After somebody goes into, medical school, then they have to go do a residency, and those residencies are not as funded as they used to be. So we're at a point where we really need to ramp that up. The AMA has recognized that. They're lobbying Congress to do things like what we're working on, the international physicians reform, but also we need to increase that pipeline. And a lot of states are doing the same thing Texas is doing. They're looking, do we need to expand our medical schools? In some states, medical schools are partnering with other universities to have, sort of additional small remote medical schools that where they can create a greater pipeline of physicians into the. But if we train if we train a bunch of doctors right now, if we start training them right now, it's 8 or 10 years before they can practice. And so the time is now to, look for every option we can to try to get more people in the pipeline.
Yeah, it seems like having too many doctors is maybe a good problem to have. Seems that
Don't
way. I don't know.
disagree. Don't
Yeah.
disagree.
Yeah, and it seems like there could be some work done on the, like you said, 8 to 10 years. Once we start training them, it's going to be a decade, give or take, before they can start practicing. That seems like a long time. And I understand you're a doctor, you're dealing with people's health. You want that to be a really high trust profession, but it still seems like maybe that could be whittled down a little bit. I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of areas where you can look at practice, you can look at telehealth, you can look at things that you can use technology to our advantage and things of that nature to get people the care they need. But the real focus that we've been tackling this in a number of states is this like, how do you find someone now? How do we get a doctor into this hospital who needs it for the patients now? And that's where the international physicians reform helps fill that gap now. If
Yeah.
if you're in rural Texas, you're a hospital and you literally need a specialist to take care of something, and we need to break down those rules that would prevent someone from coming over. I'll give you a crazy example. There's a renowned orthopedist in Switzerland who does most of the knee surgeries on Olympic skiers.
Okay.
Best in the world at what he does. He couldn't practice in Texas today.
Seems like, yeah,
Doesn't make a lot of sense.
yeah. Seems like he would be, someone that we would want to recruit to Texas. I mean, we
Agree.
don't have any skiers, but I don't know. It seems like we got
You've got a
a
lot
lot
of
of
need
professional
for.
sports, collegiate sports. They tear their ACLs.
I have a college athlete myself who had the same problem in high school.
Yeah, so it seems
So
like that would be the one we'd want to get. So let's shift gears a little bit. We
yeah,
started with homelessness, and as we mentioned, that could go a lot of different directions. and certainly public safety is one of them. Um, I guess it was 2020, 2021. The whole defund the police movement really kicked into high gear. I know
Uh-huh.
that a lot of in Austin, it was a big deal. A lot of people have backtracked on that. Austin is still suffering from a recruitment problem and a police shortage problem. Is there, and I guess the legislature and Abbott signed into law the sort of, I guess it was the Rogue DA Act or whatever.
Hmm.
Um,
That's definitely an issue in a lot of states that we've begun to work on.
yeah. So how do we tackle that? It seems like I don't know, is throwing, it doesn't seem like throwing money at the problem. And maybe that's it. Maybe police officers need to be paid more to recruit more. I don't know. How do we tackle that?
Well, we look at it like anything else. Remember, I said let's look at the metrics. Let's look at the incentives that are in place. If we do need to pay people more, let's look at how you do that in a performance-based manner. Um, I'll start with parole and probation, and I'll start with like prison workers, those who are um, dealing with those who are already incarcerated. When 95% of those that are incarcerated are going to get out of prison someday, or at least there's a scheduled release date for them. What are we doing to put incentives in place to help those people find jobs when they get out? Because it makes them 5 times less likely that they recommit more crimes and go back in. So our
Yeah.
idea is public safety needs to be about public safety. How do you reduce crime? How do you get people who have had problems back into society in a way where they're not going to continue to commit crime? But then it also requires accountability on all parts of the system. The defund the police movement, I think that most people who even spoke up for it now would say that was a pretty idiotic thing to do. But you've also got these, you talk about the rogue prosecutors or Soros backed prosecutors. We look at that issue and, we're working in Georgia and a few other states on Missouri and others on a special prosecutor reform. The idea here is if you have a prosecutor who's not doing their job, and you look at the metrics of a particular metropolitan area and their murder rate is above a certain benchmark in the state, their violent crime rate is above a certain benchmark in the state, then the state's governor or attorney general can appoint a special prosecutor to go in to help manage the crimes there, to make sure that they have the tools and the resources to prosecute those criminals rather than turn them back onto the streets where we see sort of this cycle of criminality that often leads into, devastating consequences. What we saw in Georgia, actually. But also, it's not just having the state step in when someone's not doing their job. If there's a particular area that all of a sudden they see a spike in crime and they're like, hey, we need some additional help from the state to make sure that we can do our jobs well, give them that tool as well. So that's one of the reforms that we've incubated here at the Cicero Institute that we've worked with lawmakers on and are starting to try to find those sort of innovative solutions that takes metrics, accountability, and, even financial incentives and put them in a way that oftentimes our public programs don't look at. Most of our state jobs, it's true in Texas, it's true across the country. You get paid the same wage as the person next to you, no matter how good a job you do. We need to instill the idea of, meritocracy and the ideas of excellence and reward those people who are doing a good job. If a certain prison community has a recidivism rate that drops precipitously because they've decided to do job training in their prison for people the last 6 months they're there, and they put in an innovative program, let's reward them. Let's give those workers, higher wages. Let's give that facility more tools to continue to sort of fund what's working and not what's not.
Yeah. So it seems like there's, you know, there's you and the Cicero Institute are really big on, performance and rewarding performance.
Yes.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, if I do a bad job, then I'd probably lose my job. If I do a great job, maybe I'll get paid some more. And that, but I'm on the private end of stuff, a private
Correct.
employee. Why is it that why is the state resistant to something like that? I mean, even in Texas, right?
Well, most civil service reforms historically went into place because you have a new governor come in, they fire everybody, and you lose all the talent and you lose a lot of the continuity of services and programs. And then they hire their people. Somebody else wins an election, they fire everyone, and then they hire their people. The idea is that you really do need a system that protects those who are working on a day-to-day basis to keep the state running, keep those functions of government working. So they're protected civil service jobs. But some of those reforms have gone so far so that they frankly protect incompetence, and they allow people to make the same wage and do a lot less work, or not, and to have no real incentive to solve problems. Cicero is a largely entrepreneurial organization. Our founder, Joe Lonsdale, built a bunch of really great tech companies. He's still doing that through his venture capital firm based there in Austin, 8VC. He sees that when you put the right incentives in place, you hire really talented people and you give them a huge upside to go do great things. Guess what? They go do great things. We don't have those sorts of things in a lot of our public programs. So that's why we work to do that, not only in public safety, but we're looking at reforms in higher education. Texas has a great example of performance-based funding in higher education, and that's with the technical school system in Texas. The technical school system used to be funded like most higher education. You get a certain amount per student, per credit hour, or per program, or per class, and everybody gets the same amount no matter what program they're in. And Texas, about 7 years ago, just flipped the whole model on its head and said, we want to be funded based on results. And they chose the most important factor, wages. So they agreed to have the wages of their students tracked over time. And if they were successful in raising wages, then they would get more funding. The results have been phenomenal. What's happened is all of the technical schools across Texas are reaching out to the businesses nearby and saying, what do you need? What are the high wage jobs that you need to fill? And what training do those kids need? And then they're investing in those programs, marketing those programs to students. So what's happening is they're finding a pipeline of high wage, high skilled workers that benefits all of Texas. Yes, it benefits the school because the school gets funded more, but guess what? You're funding a successful model that's producing more and more success, that's raising wages in communities, raising wages for the state, raising taxes for the state, frankly. So, success begets success. And when you put the right incentives in place, good things happen.
Yeah.
And that's, I've seen good and bad in that. And Texas is a great model of that.
Yeah, it seems like they working in silos where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. It kind of the incentives get lined up weird, and the results are less than ideal, maybe.
Yeah, and maybe you're not training the right people for the right jobs, and we end up with these situations that we have now, where people come out of school with a bunch of debt, have no job prospects, and you have the president saying, "Oh, don't worry, we'll just forgive your loans for all that, all that education you got," and that does nobody any good.
Yeah.
That doesn't do taxpayers any good. It doesn't do those students any good. And what it's doing is just propping up a broken system. So let's fix the system.
Yeah. So I guess just touch on this real quick, and then we can wrap up. And this relates to the education and everything. I know in Texas it's a problem as well. I think it's a problem in a lot of states, maybe to different degrees. But the licensing and regulatory reform, if I wanted to go cut hair for a business, or I think even braid hair, or different things, I think that's sort of changed recently. um, I need to ask the state for permission. I need a
Yeah,
license to do this. And I mean, maybe there's some logic behind it, make sure that I keep my equipment and tools clean, that sort of thing. But do I need the state's permission to do that? I think is the general question. How do y'all approach that?
well, we just put out earlier, I guess last year, and we're getting ready to redo it, a 50 state report that compares all 50 states on their regulatory environment overall. And the idea behind that is, and we measure sort of four areas that we look at to say, are you doing a good job or not? And what we want to do is create competition among the states. And we're like I said, we're getting ready to do another report. It's going to be a little more detailed, and it's going to have a state by state. Here's what you need to do to improve your regulatory environment, because you need a periodic review process, because a health and safety law that made sense 10 years ago might not make sense anymore.
Yeah.
So, we advocate for a sunset of all regulations over a period of time, whether, choose a 7-year window, 10-year window, every 5 to 7 to 10 years. Let's just look at that regulation and say, hey, do we still need it? And if so, or should we update it and make it simpler, or is it not adequate? And let's fix it. And what happens is states start to do that, and they realize, wait a second, we have a requirement that people fax a form to this agency. Nobody uses fax machines anymore. Let's take that stuff out of there. Another one is to have sort of an independent review, empower the legislature there, empower an independent review commission to be able to look at these and say, does this make sense? Is this too burdensome? Does this do a lot more than what other states are doing for this? Let's figure out where we're at and make sure that we're encouraging people to have jobs, to get licensed to practice whatever art that they're doing. The other thing is public recourse, and that's often the most important thing. That's the accountability. That's the transparency piece. How do we make sure that it's an open process, that you or I, who are going to be subject to these rules, have the ability to go and say, hey, this doesn't make any sense. Do you realize how much this is going to cost? And make it easy for smaller businesses who don't have the resources of some of these larger corporations and lawyers to continue to review these things, to challenge the laws when they overstep, when these rules of an agency overstep what the actual state law is. Allow the small business to challenge in their own court. Don't make them go to Austin to a courthouse to challenge. Let them challenge it in a court from their own jurisdiction, things of that nature. So those are the real reforms that we're looking at. And I think that if you can sort of instill that periodic review process of all laws, you create sort of a culture of cleaning a lot of that up, and a lot of that will happen organically. We've worked in a number of states, and you can write these laws, like we were working in Arizona, to just apply to sort of the licensure requirements you were telling us that you were talking about. And so there's a lot of effort there.
Can I
July,
ask?
I think August is when our new report will be out.
Okay, cool. I'll have to keep an eye out for that. I mean, Texas is often touted as, a low business regulation state. And I'm wondering, is that in absolute terms or is that in relative terms? We could be low regulation compared to, I don't know, California, but still have a lot of regulation, right?
Yeah. Texas is better than a lot of states in a lot of areas,
Sure.
but there's room for improvement.
Yeah. Well, that gives us something to work towards, right?
Absolutely.
Well, Bryan Sunderland, Director of Advocacy at the Cicero Institute, I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there website, social media that you want to plug?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find us online, ciceroinstitute.org. You can see a little bit about what we're doing, advocating across the states. It's a really exciting time at Cicero over the last 18 months. We've grown from a 9-state operation to having advocacy in 20 states across the country, and we've more than doubled the size of our policy team with some really, renowned experts on healthcare regulation and other things. So we're here to stay, and we want to be a part of the conversation.
Awesome. Well, Bryan Sunderland, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks.